I want to welcome all of you to this presentation on the history of Congregation B'nai Israel. I want you to think back 100 years to the founders of this community, because beginning this community was not without its challenges. The Jewish community was not large, was not particularly wealthy, and there was a certain degree of anti-Semitism in the community. Not everyone looked with favor on the creation of a synagogue. But those founders had a vision of a Jewish community in the eastern part of Monmouth County that would thrive, that would be a place for the education of their children, that would be a place where they could celebrate together and mourn together and worship God together, study Torah together. Those of us who are here today are living proof of the wisdom of their vision. And all we can do is hope that we have the same courage, commitment, strength, and yes, vision to take us to the next 100 years.
At the dawn of the 20th century, Red Bank emerged as a center of commerce and industry fueled by an influx of immigrants. Chief among them was Sigmund Eisner, who owned the largest uniform factory in the United States. It was located on Shrewsbury Avenue in the center of town. His employees, many of whom were immigrants from European Jewish communities, worked side by side in the factory and then practiced their Jewish faith in small groups. In 1922, two of these groups, along with local shop owners in Red Bank's business district, met on the second floor of 2 Broad Street, above J. Kreidell's men's store, and formed Congregation B'nai Israel.
My parents came to Red Bank in 1920 as newlyweds. My father started a business. He called it the upholstery shop because he couldn't use his name. It was not considered smart in a business world to use a Jewish name on your business. Silberstein, Michael, and Malvina. And there were 3 of us. I'm the middle child, and we grew up in Fairhaven. My father had his store and his business in Red Bank on East Front Street, and he built a home, and we moved there, and we were one of 5 or 6 families in Fairhaven. The Jewish community at that time was minimal. They were scattered, but most of the families lived in Red Bank, along Shrewsbury Avenue, and they all had businesses. They were retailers. Some were salespeople, but most of them went into retail. Broad Street in Red Bank, when I grew up, was all Jewish-owned businesses. And on Yom Kippur, they were closed. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you could not shop in Red Bank. All the stores were closed.
Within days of that first meeting, the new members agreed on the need for a place of worship, and a 3-story dilapidated house at 10 Riverside Avenue was up for sale. On January 24th, 1922, led by founder Max Mindlin, the congregation took title to the house. Sigmund Eisner was appointed the first honorary president. Initially, the congregation consisted of 40 families and was organized by committees on education, religion, finance, house, and building.
My father-in-law, I think, gave them money, didn't he?
Lots and lots.
To pay the rabbi. so that we would have a good rabbi. And
I think it was the first time it had ever happened.
yeah, right.
Much growth and activity followed, with the hiring of Dr. Joshua Weiner as the first rabbi. Within a few years of operation, a Sunday school and Hebrew school were formed, with dozens of students attending. Boy Scout Troop 60, as well as a YM and YWHA were started, and by 1924, membership had grown to 110 families.
The role that my father played in the establishment of mainly the youth activities at the synagogue, because he started the Boy Scout troop, and it was probably the first Jewish Boy Scout troop, at least in New Jersey. I don't know how far it reached. And he started a basketball team up in the attic. Do you remember the attic in the old city? It was not a legitimate height for the basket.
No,
Because the attic wasn't that high.
no.
And so you had to sort of shoot like that instead of like that
Yeah.
when you played basketball there.
As the 1930s arrived, so did the challenges of the Great Depression. In 1932, Rabbi Arthur Hirschon became the spiritual leader, a post he would hold for the next 27 years. In the greater Red Bank community, the Great Depression not only affected Jewish store owners, but also members of the diverse immigrant community of Monmouth County. With the hiring of Rabbi Hirschon, the congregation started community outreach while staying true to the tenets of its beliefs. Unlike the Jewish persecution in Eastern Europe, which drove many of the founders to the United States, their unification as Congregation B'nai Israel gave them an opportunity to have a community impact beyond the walls of the Riverside Avenue building. During the depths of the Depression, many members who had been active in various leadership roles were unable to pay the dues. Several had to resign, but most rejoined in subsequent years. It was during these troubled times that the world witnessed the rise of Nazism. Rabbi Hirschon took an early role in the greater community to raise awareness by holding fundraising events to aid European Jews, sponsored not only by the congregation, but by many local Christian churches as well. Hirschon, a veteran of World War I, served as the military chaplain at both Fort Hancock on Sandy Hook, as well as Fort Monmouth in Eatontown. His military connections linked the congregation to many activities with the Army, including social events for Jewish soldiers at the post, such as dances and a Passover Seder at the synagogue.
The war started. My brother went off to war, and those of us met Rabbi Hirschon, who was the chaplain at Fort Hancock, and he would take us over as teenagers to dance with the boys at Fort Hancock and keep them company one evening a week or one afternoon.
The congregation voted to open its Hebrew and Sunday schools to all Jewish children, whether or not their parents were members. On September 1st, 1939, the German invasion of Poland marked the start of World War II. Shortly after, the family of Dr. Heyman arrived in Red Bank from Germany, having successfully escaped. They were received by the congregation, which they soon joined. With the 1940s, the Nazi regime brought the most traumatic event in Jewish history, the Holocaust. The seeds of despair of that time grew into the congregation's support for the State of Israel in the years to come. After the December 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. entered the war. Americans from all walks of life were called to duty, and the congregation was no exception. For example, Morton Greenblatt, son of members of the congregation, was raised in Red Bank, attended Red Bank High School, and started at Rutgers University. In 1943, Greenblatt joined the Army Air Corps in the skies over Europe as a pilot. However, in October of 1944, he was killed in action at age 21. Rabbi Hirshon was very active in involving the congregation in causes and charities. In 1948, he was responsible for a vigorous support of helping displaced persons that had survived the war. The congregation celebrated the 1948 creation of Israel with a special event, including the closing of all Jewish businesses in the community in solidarity with the newly minted country. In 1949, Hirshon hosted former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt in Red Bank to speak at the opening ceremonies of the Women's Division of the United Jewish Appeal, bringing local and national attention to the congregation.
I have vivid memories of my grandmother and other ladies in the congregation embroidering tablecloths. I remember them, what we used to affectionately call the kitchen ladies. If there was an oneg or a kiddush, or there was someone who couldn't afford a reception for a bar mitzvah or a meal, these women would appear in the kitchen and magic would happen. Mrs. Lefkowitz, Jeanette Winters, Selma Mammon would be at the top of the list. I'm sure I'm leaving a number of women out, but with my grandmother, May Newman, they just made things happen in the kitchen to support the congregation and to support people who perhaps couldn't have a celebration after a B'nai Mitzvah.
The early 1950s brought yet another conflict to American life, this time in Korea, while the world was still healing the wounds of World War II. Those that had served in Europe and returned to the United States knew that so much had been lost during the war that a proliferation of new Jewish congregations flourished.
I went to Sunday school. Girls didn't go to Hebrew school. They were not bat mitzvahed. Sunday school was a big thing. It was enjoyed by everyone. It was a good time for all of us to get together and, meet kids our own age.
At Congregation B'nai Israel, the membership grew to 275 families by 1952. Events filled the calendar with spiritual and social activities as the members engaged in all facets of the Jewish and American experience, locally, nationally, and globally. It was at this time when it became clear the house on Riverside Avenue had been outgrown. Over the next few years, committees were formed to plan all aspects of a move. At the November 1955 trustees meeting, William Klatsky, chairman of the legal committee, announced that the borough of Rumson had granted the congregation a variance to erect a synagogue, a religious center, educational institution, and Sunday school at Hance and Ridge Roads. Construction began, and in May of 1958, the new home of Congregation B'nai Israel was completed and dedicated. After the opening of the new facilities, Rabbi Hirshon retired in 1959, and Rabbi Gilbert Rosenthal became the new spiritual leader. Sidney Scharf was hired as the first cantor teacher, and as the decade came to a close, membership had grown to 380 families. With the election of John F. Kennedy as president in 1960, the decade began with much hope and promise. The 60s called for a new era in America, a time of civic involvement, new policies, and a challenge to put mankind on the moon. Just a few years later, assassinations of Kennedy, his brother Bobby, Martin Luther King, and widespread unrest would upend the dream. At the congregation, 1964 brought the engagement of Rabbi Jack Rossoff as spiritual leader, who had been the chaplain at Fort Monmouth and was well known in the area. Rossoff and the congregation knew that with all the turmoil in the nation and around the world, they needed to focus on the youth. The next generation would need to solve the challenges of the time. Rossoff and his wife, Dr. Barbara Rossoff, embarked on a mission of youth enrichment, including an exemplary high school education program, as well as a vibrant chapter of the United Synagogue Youth led by Dr. Cy Sigler.
What I found was a school, I think it was third grade, fourth grade, fifth. There were just a few grades in the school. Barbara can say more about that. And I felt a very strong need to establish a high school, which we did. And it was 1 hour a week. And we had an enrollment of 90 students initially, the initial year. And then after 2 years, we increased it to two hours a week, and we enrolled about 160 youth. Initially, nobody thought that the kids would come, the parents wouldn't support it, but the kids came and the parents supported it, and the trustees appropriated the money that was needed. We got faculty from the Jewish Theological Seminary, from the Rabbinical School. It was a high-quality faculty.
Rossoff was a leader in the 1966 rally for Soviet Jews at Madison Square Garden, and CBI turned out a large group for the event. There were many other events with strong leadership from Rabbi Rossoff, including a 1967 Monmouth County rally for Israel related to the Six-Day War, plus a speaking role at a memorial for Dr. Martin Luther King held in Red Bank. As the U.S. landed astronauts on the moon in the summer of 1969, CBI began sending dozens of scholarship winners on an annual summer trip to Israel. The United Synagogue Youth Pilgrimage became a program that would grow over the years and still exists today.
The 1970s saw the end to the war in Vietnam. At the same time, women's role in society was changing, and the American Jewish community welcomed the redefinition of traditional roles. Previously, the sisterhood was responsible for many aspects of the congregation, such as social, fundraising, and celebratory events. However, until this time, the all-male Board of Trustees controlled most of the operational aspects of the congregation. Marilyn Ostroff and Betty Cottonoff became the first women on the board as sisterhood representatives during these years. And not long after, Marilyn Strauss became the first woman elected to the Board of Trustees. Other changes followed, such as the listing as member to be changed to the whole family, rather than male, head of family. Inclusion of women in rituals also started during this time, including the ability to carry and read from the Torah and serve on the religious committee. In September of 1970, the congregation cemetery, located in what is now Tinton Falls, was vandalized under the cover of darkness. Several gravestones were overturned, as well as damage to a tent for services. This desecration followed similar acts a year prior at the site, as well as incidents at other Jewish cemeteries in the area. 1972 brought the start of a new construction project to serve the growing congregation. The gym, library, classrooms, and a chapel were added on the east end of the building. This project concluded as the congregation celebrated its 50th anniversary. As the United States came to terms with the Watergate scandal and the resignation of President Nixon, CBI continued to expand and prosper. In 1978, a fundraising event, the annual Walk for Israel, later renamed the Shore Area Walk for Israel, was launched. The 25-kilometer walk was attended by over a dozen area congregations. Funds went to humanitarian causes in Israel. In 1979, members Dr. Seymour Siegler and Professor Jack Needle founded the Center for Holocaust Studies, later becoming the Center for Holocaust, Human Rights, and Genocide Education at Brookdale Community College. The 1980s began with the country celebrating the appointment of the first woman Supreme Court Justice, Sandra Day O'Connor, while Congregation B'nai Israel celebrated its first woman president, Gloria Landy.
Several years after the pulpit opened up, women became members of the Board of Trustees, and then the first woman was elected president of the congregation.
Her signature achievement was the rejuvenation of the Gan Yeladim, the congregation nursery school. By 1983, world events once again inspired a call to action at CBI. Jews in the Soviet Union were under severe persecution, and many Jewish communities in the United States rallied to petition U.S. lawmakers. They collected goods and materials to send to those unable to leave the USSR. Rabbi Rosoff formed a Soviet Jewry committee, and several refusnik families were symbolically adopted. In 1987, 150 congregation members attended a rally for the Soviet Jews in Washington, D.C. The following year, one of the refusniks, Natasha Kassin, was released and went on a speaking tour in the U.S. She visited CBI and was welcomed as an honorary member of the congregation by Rabbi Rosoff. The 1990s started with Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, followed by America's involvement in the Gulf War. At home, both the synagogue and neighboring Church of the Nativity were desecrated by vandals who eventually were caught and prosecuted. The 90s also ushered in the Internet age, changing society forever. 1991 brought the formation of Ezra, a volunteer organization to serve the congregation as well as the community at large. Ezra raised funds for Rwandan refugees and created Operation Isaiah, a program for disadvantaged youth in the area. The charity thrives today, supporting many local organizations such as Lunch Break of Red Bank and 180 Turning Lives Around. During these years, a College Connection Committee was formed to stay in touch with Hebrew High School alumni who had moved on to the next stage of life. 1998 saw Rabbi Rosoff start his next chapter as emeritus rabbi, as he resigned after 34 years of service. His accomplishments, especially in the areas of education and community outreach, have impact to this day. Rabbi Harry Levin was installed as the new spiritual leader. The promise and hope of a new millennium were quickly challenged by the attacks on the United States of September 11th, 2001. Rabbi Levin was a lead speaker at the community gathering at Fairhaven Fields. The CBI choir joined other choirs across many denominations at Tower Hill Church in recognition of that terrible day. In 2003, Rabbi Levin was succeeded by Rabbi Robert E. Fine. Rabbi Fine started an evening Bible study class enjoyed by many. 2005 brought another change in spiritual leadership, with Rabbi Andrew Bloom taking the post. Rabbi Bloom helped facilitate the modernizing of the main sanctuary during his tenure. Dr. Jonas Schulman led a revival of the Youth Commission that sponsored Kadima Games, USY basketball, regional dances, Shabbat services, and summer camping. Marla Baragel was one of the first women ordained as cantor by the conservative movement. One of her accomplishments was the formation of a choir led by Rob and Pat Fire. The Choir of Fire would perform for the next 25 years and was a beloved feature of the community. In 2011, Rabbi Jeff Saltar became the interim rabbi, and he inspired the lay leadership to make the governance more functional. By June of 2015, the membership had approved a new constitution and bylaws. Rabbi Saltar collaborated with the leadership to make the entry to the building more welcoming, and as a result, major renovations were completed to the structure. The entryway was rebuilt, administrative offices were moved, and other improvements made. The Komar family and many others made the construction possible. When Rabbi Saltar stepped down, Cantor Dov Goldberg took on multiple duties, including acting rabbi. In 2016, after earning his rabbinical degree, he assumed duties as Rabbi Goldberg. In 2018, congregation member Arthur Ashkin was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for his work at Bell Labs on optics. In 2019, Rabbi Goldberg was succeeded by Rabbi Doug Sagel. No one could have imagined what was in store for the year 2020. A new, highly contagious virus named COVID-19 swept the world, causing serious illness and death. In efforts to slow the spread of the disease, most of the United States went under lockdown, and activities like travel, school, and religious gatherings were canceled. CBI responded aggressively and creatively, holding services and meetings virtually, using the emerging video conferencing technology that had become common in most homes. This brings us to 2022 and a full 100 years of service. Today, the congregation is thriving. Gun enrollment is at full capacity, creating an entree for young families to join the CBI community. In-person services and activities have returned, and a sense of rebirth has arrived.
I would like people to look at this period of time and say, this is when the synagogue began its current path that has led now to the thriving, growing, exciting, and holy community that it is today. Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, the first chief rabbi of what was then Palestine, said, "The old will become new, and the new will become holy."